guys, welcome back to Remove Before Race, and today we're testing the brand new M4 CS, which you may have seen in my collection video. Now the hierarchy of BMW M cars has changed a little bit. You start with the M Lights, go to the M cars, then you've got the compacts, and now you've got the CS range, which comes back from the heritage of the CSL Batmobile, and it's meant to sit above the compacts as more special cars. So BMW call this a limited production special edition. And what that means in layman's terms is there's no limited numbers, not on the M4, whereas the M3 CS only has 1,000 in the world, but it is limited in terms of the months it's produced. So we estimate around about 2,000 or maybe 3,000 will be made, but let's see how they fare in the future. And we'll talk about the future value of this car later in the review. The car is also about £90,000. And that's a point that we absolutely have to address, and I will address it, and we'll be honest about it. But first, let's talk about where a lot of that money is going, and that's the actual design of the car. So let's start with the front end. So the CS is distinctive immediately from the front end. And the main thing that you're spending your money on in terms of design is this. It's the carbon fiber hood, which comes straight out of the M4 GTS. Now, it is really special looking. You've got this lovely power dome. There's an air intake here. And if I open it up and show you a shot now what the carbon looks like underneath, it is one of the most gorgeous things that you will ever behold in an engine bay. It looks absolutely lovely. But of course, there's not a lot of times that you're going to do that. So the main benefit of this is the weight saving. Next, obviously, you've got the facelifted headlights, which have come out of the facelift. Black kidney grills, but you have a unique carbon front lip here, which you don't get in any other M4, and it actually looks really good, and it gives a lovely stance and a unique look to the front end of the CS. Everything else on the front is the same. So if we come around now to the side, so the first thing you'll notice on the side is the new forged alloy wheels. They're a staggered setup, so we've got 19s on the front and 20s on the rear. But I'll speak more about the wheels and the tyres because they're a big part of the CS later. The design is really quite nice, and they're finished in like a satin graphite grey. There's nothing else too different on the side. You've still got the carbon fibre roof as you have on all M4s without sunroofs. And now let's come to the back, where you've got probably the best part of the design of the CS. Now I really do love the rear of this car, and the main reason is the OLED tail lights that you guys may have seen in pictures. Let me show them to you now. They are like wafer thin little strips of OLED, and they look absolutely gorgeous when they're animating in the rear. And it's something that just sets the CS apart, links it nicely to the GTS as well. And it's just really a talking point when you're talking about this car. The other bit that is unique to this car is the ducktail spoiler on the rear. It's got a nice sort of devil horned look, which makes it unique to the other ones that you get on M4s. And you also bring across the carbon rear diffuser out of the GTS. And you've also got titanium pipes, but the rest of the system is not titanium. It's just a more free-flowing exhaust, but we'll talk about that later. Now let's head inside and see what else has changed in this car. Now let's talk about the inside, because there's a lot of plus points here and there's some negatives as well. Now the interior is really quite special. It's got lots of Alcantara, lots of black Nappa leather. It's got a lovely looking CS logo, which has been ingrained into this front Alcantara on the dash here. And you've got a similar effect on the 12 o'clock position on the steering wheel. And it all looks really special. And this is a positive point, because you jump into a lot of M cars, like the standard M3 and the M4 Comp, and they just don't look different enough to their diesel counterparts. Whereas you get in the CS, it's much of the effect that you have of getting into the GTS, where it just looks so special. And you can see that it's a very different addition to those standard cars. So that is a great plus point. The negative is you lose so much storage space because of the lightweight doors. As an example, the door cards. Again, from the GTS, there's absolutely no storage here. There's no storage here either. All you've got is your glove box and 2 cup holders. And if you're a coffee drinker like me, you're basically screwed, because all your phones, your keys and everything has to find some space on your own person. So very limited. But on the M3 CS, the door cards are actually no different to the standard M3. So perhaps that's a little bit more of a practical car, but if we get around to that car, we'll have a look and see if it makes much of a difference. What I really do like is the seats. They hug you really well. They're really nicely shaped. You've got sort of the recesses in between, which are quite nice, unless you have kids and they tickle you. and you've got the lighted M4 logo in the seat as well, and it's all a nice touch. Even the seat belts have got the M colours stitched into it. And then of course you've got these famous door pulley handles of the CS, which they're quite oddly positioned because they're right near the hinge, so to actually close it, it's quite a struggle, as I'll show you. There's a lot of pulling you have to do. It was a bit further down that way, it might make a little bit more sense, but this is what M are doing for weight saving. We've also got a much thicker steering wheel than what you're used to in the M4. It's actually a bit too thick, I think, but it's got a lovely feel to it. It's nice that it's all Alcantara. As I've said before, I am of the school of thought that Alcantara gives you a bit more feel through the steering. Now let's talk about the infotainment system and the driver zone here. We've got the latest iDrive, so it's all touchscreen here in the front, which is nice to have the latest one. There is only a part digi display in the driver zone, and as I've mentioned in the collection video, this is nice if you like analog dials, but really when you compare it to something like the new RS5 or the C63S facelift that's just come out, it's looking really, really dated. Now, if you're a big fan of analog, yes, you may like this, but otherwise this is looking quite tired now. You'll also notice, because of the way the door cards are made, there's a lot less speakers, and that actually factors into the performance of the car, believe it or not, but I'll talk about that later and how that matters a lot. The other thing that I really don't like is the design of the key. It's the most standard BMW key you can get, and for a limited edition, this is really a shame because it just looks so mundane. But let's now get the car started. I'll show you what it sounds like on startup with some revs, then we'll go for a cruise and see what the performance is like. So let's see now how all those changes have affected the drive and the performance of the M4 in this CS. Now, to begin, I'll let you know what driving modes I've got. I've set the gearbox into sport. The suspension is on comfort because it is quite a harsh ride in this. And I've set the steering to comfort as well. I spoke to a number of other M owners about this, and they concurred that the steering, if you put it into sport, it just becomes over-exaggerated and a bit artificially heavy. So comfort is actually a really nice setting and hits the balance well for steering feel. Now, this car was really developed heavily around the Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tyres. Now, you guys may know from my AMG GTR reviews. If you don't, I'll fill you in. The Cup 2s are very, very much summer tyres. They do incredibly well in conditions like today. We're in the middle of May, where it's dry, the heat is on, there's no dampness, and they really just stick to the road incredibly well. And that is part of the reason why this special edition was designed around these tyres, and it really was designed around them. Frank Van Meel and his team at M Division specifically tuned both the power steering and the dampers on the CS specifically around the Cup 2 tyres to get the maximum that they could out of them in terms of grip and steering. So whereas you can option the Super Sports on the CS as well, free of charge, it would be an odd choice to make considering how much of the car has been based around the Cup 2s. Now, how much of that do you actually feel when you're driving the CS in terms of what changes they've made? And the answer is quite a lot, because you've got narrower front tyres. The turn-in is really precise. You know exactly where the wheels are, which is a lovely feeling when you're going at speed. It really gives you confidence. You know exactly where you can place the car. And this is also where I think you start to see and feel that 35 kg weight difference between the CS and the compact. And 35 kgs is a lot of weight savings, and you really feel it. The more speed you bring on, that reduction of weight, it just really helps make this feel so much lighter through the corners. The other great thing is the rear tyres are wider and grippier, especially in these conditions, so you can apply more power quicker coming out of a corner, and that gives you a lot more confidence. And in these kind of conditions, it has a massive psychological effect, whereas previously the M4 is legendary for having a skippy rear end and a really nervous tail. This car gives you confidence to build the speed, accelerate quicker and quicker out of a corner than you could previously in another M4, and that makes all the difference to how you drive this and how confident you feel while driving it. And you can't underestimate confidence. Confidence is the key part of driving a fast sports car. The more confidence you have, the faster you'll be able to go, and that is just proven in the Nürburgring lap time, where this car did 7 minutes and 38 seconds, which is a great feat for a car like this. The M4 chassis has always been brilliant in terms of lack of understeer, and the CS just builds upon that. And again, that comes into what we were saying earlier about how you can have more and more confidence going into and coming out of a corner. Having extensively driven the C63S, and we had that great review of the RS5 and the RS4 Avant, it is really nice to drive a car which is in the same marketplace as those cars, the same size, but it feels so light coming in and out of a corner. I'm really impressed by this. It's just, I mean, the 35 kg, it's not a lot, but it feels like it's had a massive effect. Now let's get on to the engine. It is the same S55 unit that you find in the normal M4. It's come up only by an indiscernible 10 brake horsepower, whereas the compact comes up 19 on the standard car, and I think you did feel that, and you don't feel this at all. That being said, however, the torque figure is up by 10%, and it's now up to 442 Newton meters of torque. And this actually holds a lot of significance because that torque seems to come in to the previously weak mid-range of the car, where the car just felt a little bit lacking in that sort of 2,500 revs area. Now it's no longer a talking point. The car just works as it should and never feels like it's lacking power or pull, fixing what I feel was one of the big negative points of the compact M4. But part of the problem is where the compact only asks for another £3,000 on top of the standard M4, the CS is asking for about 30. And when you've only got a horsepower increase of 10, you haven't got the water cooling from the GTS, you haven't got the titanium exhaust system, it starts to look like a lot of money for little gain. Kind of feels like turning up at a Michelin star restaurant and being served Heinz baked beans on some fancy bread for 20 quid. Feels a bit like a kick in the nuts. Now the 0 to 60 is said to be 3.9 seconds. I really don't feel any difference between this and the compact in that regard, but it does sound different. Now let's get on to the sound of this car, because it's actually quite a positive note. I mentioned earlier that there are a lot less speakers in this car, and that was relevant to the performance. And the reason that is, as you know, BMW cars are now notorious for having this thing called active sound management. And what that means is they pump fake sound through the speakers to augment the sound of the engine. It's really unnecessary, because if you go to the BMW forums, you'll find a lot of petrol heads who have completely disabled the ASM, and the cars sound much better for it. Now the benefit of the way that the CS has been made is due to these lightweight materials and other weight saving. There's a lot less speakers, thus a lot less of that ASM, and it is a really noticeable thing. I've heard something about a more free-flowing exhaust. I can't find anything official to state that, but it's been in a lot of the press reviews. I can hear it though, and I don't know whether that's because there's less sound deadening in the car and the lack of that ASM, but the result of it is that the car sounds really, really good compared to the standard M4, especially when you're hitting it at load. As I mentioned in other reviews, like in the RS5, this car is really great in the higher rev ranges. When you're passing 4,000 revs, it really begins to scream, and it's got a really nice tune to it. Now, as far as sound goes, when you look at the competition, undoubtedly the leader is the maniacal sounding C63S Coupe. This is not the kind of sound I personally like, but it's definitely an improvement over the compact. I did spec the carbon ceramic brakes on this, which was a painful exercise in itself, but they're really, really good, especially in daily use. And I think carbon ceramics across the board on performance cars have become a lot better because they just seem to not have that fade in low speeds anymore, and it's certainly the case with the CS. The gearbox is an interesting one. Works 95% of the time. Sometimes it does not like to shift down, as I just saw there, from 5th to 4th, 4th to 3rd. Again, there was at least a second delay there. It's funny how roles have sort of reversed. Back in the days with the W04 C63, that's the kind of thing you would have had. Delayed response with the gear change again there. And the M3 of the time, a lot quicker, a lot sharper. Now the C63 shifts gears on a dime, doesn't have the tail end, that'll kill you, but the M4 does. And it doesn't like to shift quick all of the time. It's bizarre how the roles have reversed. Suspension is pretty much identical to the compact, but as I mentioned earlier, the M Division team have adjusted the dampers to work with the Cup 2, so there is some difference. Feels a bit tauter to me. I don't know whether that's the weight difference. It's certainly pretty jarring, even in comfort, in these more typical sort of British B roads. But where it really counts in performance, the chassis and the suspension, stiffer, more immediate, more responsive. So yeah, in terms of the actual objective that this car is trying to chase, it hits the nail on the head. It's amazing how much the weather can change this car. You guys who saw my collection video know that I picked the car up in the winter, as I end up picking up all of my roadsters and track cars, which is really annoying. And during the winter, this car was just like the compact and the standard M4. It was just too tail happy to use daily. But in these conditions, it is so good and so fun to drive fast. It just makes use of those Cup 2s so well, and I just feel it's a lot more reliant on them than, say, something like my AMG GTR, which was similarly developed. Because the GTR is just a lot more drivable in the winter. It doesn't want to skip around as much as this does, but this really comes alive in conditions like this. Now, all of that is great. You can start to see a method to BMW's madness with this car. There are little incremental changes that tidy up some of the issues that the compact M4 was renowned for. But we have to then eventually come back to the price of this thing. And at £90,000, it is a very tough argument to make. It's trying to be a step up to the GTS, but unlike something like the C63 507 that got really quite close to the Black Series in specification, this just doesn't get close enough to the GTS to justify that price point, in my opinion. Now, a good friend of mine, Sideways Sid, who you've seen on the channel before, when I was discussing this car with him, made a fair point that if the car wasn't, say, at a 30k premium, maybe it was just at 10 and it sat around about, say, the 70, 75,000 pound mark, then it would probably be a lot more desirable and would eventually end up picking up a premium where this car sits already at the moment. That is a fair point to make, but then that doesn't really justify the price of this car as it stands. Having bought one and owned one, I do think it was just priced too high, certainly looking at the used market right now. But I wonder what will happen in the future. On limited production cars, you have to almost try and look with hindsight into the future as to how petrolheads will look back at this car. Now, in the future, we're eventually going to be surrounded by hybridized performance cars, 4-pot Porsche GT3s, 6-pot C63s, and other varied, depressing scenarios. And you might even end up with an M4 with X-Drive and a really small engine. At that point, the guy who wants a more pure M4 will be looking back on the used market for the perfect version of that car. And at that point, will that M fan be looking at the extremely expensive M4 GTS, the slightly flawed M4 Compact and standard M4, or this, which arguably is the sweet spot and seems to fix all the issues that the standard M4 has? I would suggest it's the latter, and that the value of these cars will thus hold because of that. The only spanner in the works to that is the new M2 competition, which is using the same S55 engine, and we all love the M2 Coupe, and if that is a better car all round than this, then it's going to be in trouble. It also remains to be seen whether the M3 CS will be a better option than this. It's a little bit more practical with more storage space. The M3 has generally been more well received by drivers as well, so it'll be interesting to see how that as a formula works compared to the M4. A lot of people also point out that you can buy these forge wheels as an example, as an aftermarket part from BMW M. You can also get similar looking carbon fiber rear spoilers, front splitters, etc. You can put the Cup 2s on a compact. Would that get it really close to the CS? I don't think it would actually count in the areas that matter. I think the stuff that the CS has improved is that slightly weak mid-range with the increase of torque. You've got a less skippy rear end, and you can't just put that down to changing wheels and tyres. The dampers and the steering have been adjusted to suit that as well, and it does come through to the driver. Of course, the sound is on another level compared to the comp. It's just more pure. You get more of the actual engine note. This stuff you can't retro into a compact. So all those little changes that make the CS what it is make this the best performing M4 that you can currently buy, and that will be very important down the line, and it's very important today in terms of this being a CS flagship. It is the best M4 that you can have. But if you're dwindling between this and say something like a 911 Carrera S or a GTS, well, I'd be interested to hear what you guys would have to say, whether you'd pick one of those over this. Or indeed, even the AMG fans, I suspect like me, you'll be much happier in the C63S, albeit a little heavier, but that soundtrack makes up for so much. This is a car that really rewards you when it comes down to it. The faster and faster you drive, I don't think you're going to discern the differences made as a daily driver, but if you pick up pace and you're hitting corners hard and you're coming out, that's when you start to see it. The more you exploit it, the more you will enjoy this. And the M-Power driver will really appreciate that, because it's always at the nth degree of the limit of performance that the ultimate driving machine is meant to come alive. And it's certainly the case with this CS. Guys, thank you so much for watching this. I hope this was helpful as a way of understanding what the CS brand is bringing from M Division. Please do like and subscribe, and we'll see you all again soon. Chewie, don't leave yet. Come here. I got a present for you. Remember I went to Dubai?
Yeah. I've got to see what this is. Do I dare you look at this?
It's nothing bad.
You haven't skinned a camel or something, have you? Camel sack or something.
So we're going to the shed.
It's a portrait.
It is a work of art. It was handcrafted by I gave them one of your selfies that you took.
Resemblance. Me or him?
Wow, that is, oh my days, look at that.
Oh dude, I should get one of you, shouldn't I?
When you have friends like me, who needs enemies?
Absolutely.